my kitchen today and tuning into my channel Unmodern Living. Today I'm going to be making icicle pickles, or at least the start of them. Icicle pickles take a number of days, I think actually about 14 in total. So this is the day one of icicle pickle making. Now the reason I go to all that work is icicle pickles are a really neat sweet pickle that you just can't buy at the grocery store, or at least I've never found a grocery store pickle that tastes quite anything like it. It also is one of my favorite pickles because it uses up all of my medium-sized cucumbers out of my garden. So let's get started with our icicle pickles. Now this recipe that I got from my mother-in-law calls for 2 gallons of cucumbers. Now, how many is 2 gallons of cucumbers? Good question. What I did is I found a container and I just measured out 2 gallons, which is 32 cups of water, and I marked it 2 gallons. Now, if you've got a large Tupperware bowl, that would also work. I wouldn't recommend a metal container because we're gonna leave these sitting for several days in a vinegar solution, and I just don't think that would be great. I used to have a big old glass crock that was the inside of an old, I think it was the inside of an old crock pot actually. But I don't have that anymore. So a Tupperware or a plastic container, the important thing is you need to be able to put a lid on it. So definitely keep that in mind when you're hunting for a container to make icicle pickles. So we need to prepare our cucumbers. Pretty straightforward, really. You're gonna just, like I said, sort out the ones that are the right size. I got a whole box here, and I'm just gonna scrub them all up. I usually have some water running, but you wouldn't have to. You can scrub them all and then just rinse them. I use just a scrubby pad, because it takes off any of those little, I don't know, what do you call them? The little bristly things on cucumbers. Bristly things, not a very technical term, is it? Sharp little pointy things, I don't know. But I remove them just by scrubbing them all, and it also gets all the dirt off of my cucumbers that came out of the garden. Just a great way to get started. So I just fill up my sink and I get them all washed up. Now my recipe, which I'll have a link to down below in the description, says to cut them long, but not too slender, to leave on the skin and remove the seeds. So I find it easiest just to cut it straight down the center like that. Here, like that. Now, not too slender, but honestly, I think that this is maybe a little too thick. I normally would cut them probably in half. So I get something that looks kind of like this, and if I see seeds left behind, I just cut those out. So what you end up with is just kind of like the meaty part of the cucumber, which is why you can use these larger cucumbers, because the seeds get tossed aside anyways. It's really not a big deal. Yeah, so and it doesn't have to be exact. You don't want them to be super, super thin. Yeah, but other than that, it's just going through the process of cutting these through here, just like that. And I'm just gonna keep working away at this until my cucumbers in my pail get to my 2 gallon line. So it's gonna take me a little bit, but it's worth the effort, trust me. Okay, so I've got my 2 gallons of cucumbers ready to roll. They look fantastic, and I'm ready to put the brine over top of them. Now my brine directions are pretty simple. It's going to be enough boiling water to cover your cucumbers, plus 2 cups of pickling salt that's been dissolved in it. Now it's really, really important that you use pickling salt, because regular table salt will have iodine in it, and that will make for mushy pickles, and nobody wants a mushy pickle. So make sure that you buy pickling salt, and you're gonna need 2 cups. Now, the water isn't an exact measurement because it's really going to depend on the container that you put them into. So I always just put my 2 cups of pickling salt in my pot. I boil a pot full of water so that that pickling salt's all dissolved. I pour that over top of my cucumbers, and if there isn't enough water in there to cover the cucumbers, I just boil more water, but I don't worry about adding more pickling salt because the 2 cups are already in the first batch of water. Now, after you have your pickles covered in the brine, you're gonna leave them sit for 7 days with a cover on the container, okay? 7 days is really important. Now, you can't just go on vacation for those 7 days because you are gonna wanna stir them every day or every 2 days at the very most. I usually try to do it every single day. If you don't stir them, they're gonna get kind of a scummy cover on the top of them, and you don't want that. So make sure you do stir them every day for the next 7 days. Okay, so it's day 2, and my pickles have been sitting here since last night when I put the boiling water with the salt on them, and every day, today and for the next 6 days, so 7 days in total, I just have to give them a stir. It's quite simply just to mix it up and make sure that the ones that are on the top get to the bottom, etc. And like I said, if I don't, then there can be kind of a scum that gets formed on top, so it's no big deal, just give them a little stir. Voila, lid goes back on, and we're good till tomorrow. Okay, so we're on day 7 of icicle pickle making, and if you see in the bucket, the water's kind of skanky, not so great looking. That's okay, they've been sitting in here for 7 days. So all we're gonna do is we're gonna dump this into the sink, we're gonna rinse them with fresh water, and then put them back in this bucket and cover them with fresh boiling water till tomorrow. So day 7 is just a matter of getting rid of this water, cleaning off the cucumbers, and putting fresh boiling water on them. Okie dokie, so we're on day 9 of icicle pickles. So today, all I'm gonna do is dump out yesterday's boiling water. And again, I'll probably just give my cucumbers a quick rinse in the sink and put them back in the pail. And then today, what I do is I cover them with boiling water that I'm just gonna boil it up on my stove, as well as 2 tablespoons of alum. And that's gonna help them to be nice and crunchy. Today is day 10 of icicle pickle production. And what I'm gonna do first is I'm gonna drain off my solution from yesterday of the water and the alum. And I'm just gonna pour the whole works into the sink and let that all drain off. Now while I'm doing that and letting that sit to drain, I'm gonna mix my syrup up because I have to pour my boiling syrup over my cucumbers today. So I'll put those back in the pail here in just a second. To make my syrup, I'm going to need to have 10 cups of vinegar and 12 cups of sugar. So it seems like a lot, but you gotta remember that we're gonna boil this syrup for three different days in a row. And there'll be a little bit of evaporation, plus the cucumbers are gonna soak some of it up. So it does take quite a bit of vinegar and sugar. It also makes for a very aromatic kitchen when you're cooking it, because it's certainly, people are gonna know you're making pickles, no question there. There's 8. And 2 more will make 10. Okay, 12 cups of sugar. Okay, now to that I have to add my pickling spice. Now it says to put your pickling spice in a mesh bag. I don't happen to have a mesh bag, but I do have pickling spice and cheesecloth, and that's gonna work just fine. So, 3 tablespoons of pickling spice I'm gonna put in the center of this little square cheesecloth. And to that, I'm just gonna take the corners. Now I happen to have a piece of twist tie here that I'm gonna use to seal that off with. You could use a rubber band, a piece of string, whatever you got, it'll work. Piece of twist tie. Seems to do the job for me. And you're just gonna make a little sachet here of spice, and that way it doesn't leak out when you're boiling. Because what you're gonna do is boil this solution. I'm gonna put my cucumbers back in my plastic pail, and then I'm gonna pour the boiling liquid over top of them and let that sit till tomorrow. And then I'm gonna drain the liquid off back into my pot and do that again for 3 days in a row. Now this is also the point in time where I add a little bit of food coloring to my pickles. I find I can always add more in the coming days if I don't think they're turning the right color. But for today I'm gonna put in 5 drops of green and 3 drops of blue. And we'll see how that looks for color. I'm just gonna pop this on the stove and bring it to a boil. So my cucumbers are back in my pail, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my boiling syrup very carefully, and I'm going to pour it over top of those cucumbers in the pail. And you'll see it's got a bit of a green tinge to it. If I decide down the road that I need to have more color, I can add some more tomorrow, or the next day, or the day after that, because I have to boil that syrup for 3 days in a row. So I'm just gonna put the lid back on these guys, and I'm gonna let them sit for another 24 hours. Okay, so it's 1 more day of boiling syrup. I'm gonna take my little spice bag here to boil my syrup. And I can tell as I'm pouring this syrup off that most of the food coloring has already gone into these cucumbers, and they're not quite the color I want them to be yet. So I'm just gonna add a couple more drops of the green and probably 1 more drop of blue food coloring into my syrup here. get as much as I can out of here. Perfect, just like that. And now I'm gonna pick out the few that jumped in, boil my syrup, and pour it back over my cucumbers. Okay, so it's day 14 and it's go time. So I'm going to drain the juice off my cucumbers, put it in the pot, get it boiling. I've already got my jars in the oven and they've been sterilized and are just sitting there kind of in a warming mode. And I've got my snap lids in a pot here and they're getting ready to boil. So I don't actually cook the cucumbers at any point. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna jar them up as quickly as possible, pour the boiling liquid over the top of them, and seal them with a lid as fast as possible, and that will be all they need to be ready to go to the basement. So first things first, drain the syrup. Try not to spill too much because it makes such a sticky mess. As much as I possibly can off of here. Okay, just gonna take out the jumpers. I'll put my seasoning bag back in my brine. And I'm gonna put that on the stove to boil. Okay, while that is heating up, I'm gonna start jarring these guys. So my jars, like I said, have been sterilized, but they're not super hot anymore. I turned my oven off. Too hot to touch them. So I'm gonna just use a cloth here to hold them. And I'm gonna try to fill this jar as full as I can. So I kind of lay them in on their sides and just kind of stack them in there. I wanna fill as much of it as I can. Part of the reason why I need to make sure it gets really full is if I don't have it full enough, there's too much room in this jar for syrup, and I'm gonna run out of brine before I get all my jars filled. So I do wanna make sure I put as many in here as I can. Okay, so my cucumbers are all jarred. Works out to 13 jars for this recipe. It's gonna be around a dozen, give or take, okay? And then I've got my syrup. I'm just gonna bring it over here, and it is boiling like crazy. And I've got my lids, which were just boiling a second ago. And I want my tongs. Maybe a little overkill with the super long tongs, but that's okay. And I've got my jar of ring lids. Okay, so here we go. Oh, that vinegar is something else right up your nose. Okay. Now, you definitely want to make sure that if you have any little bits of cucumber or anything on the rim of your jar, that you wipe that away before you try to put your lid on, or your snap lid will not seal. Okay, I'll wipe them all in a second. I'm gonna fill them all and then I'll ring them all. I could do them one by one, but I just find it's easier to do all of one job at a time and then all of the next. You can see my liquid's got a little bit of a greeny tinge to it. Most of the food coloring that I had put in that brine has been absorbed into the cucumbers, but there's a little bit left in here, which is totally cool. Ooh-wee. That's some strong vinegar. Now you're going to notice when I start putting the lids on that I have a few cheese whiz jars. I have found that cheese whiz jars are the one kind of jar that you can recycle and get the lid to seal reliably. A lot of salsa jars I've tried, doesn't work. Con queso, yeah, no, not happening. They just don't seal, so that's a little bit disappointing when that happens. So the only jars that I save, because I find they work, are cheese whiz jars. Now I'm going to have syrup left over, which is totally fine. I didn't screw anything up. I would much rather have syrup left over than have a jar with cucumbers in it and no syrup to pour over it. So I'm just going to, like I said, do not breathe that in. Okay, I think these are all good. So that'll just get dumped, no big deal. And it's time to start jarring. I'm just going to give everybody a quick little wipe. these jars are really, really warm. So I'm just gonna use a rag to try to hold them as I put the lid on. Just like that. It is a definite plus to me to have a pickle recipe that doesn't have to go in my canner. I know it took a little longer because these were 14 days of stirring them and brining them, and cooking the brine and all that. But at least when you're done, you're done. You don't have to worry about trying to put them in a canner to seal them or anything like that. They're just good to go. So yeah. Okay, so there we have it. 13 jars of pickles ready to go down to the basement. Now I'm definitely going to check in a couple hours because these little lids here right now, see that? That means they haven't sealed, but it's because they're still hot. As the temperature goes down, that lid is going to snap down into place, and once I know that it's snapped, I won't be able to make that little sound, and then I'll know that they're sealed and they're ready to go to the basement for the winter. Once they're sealed, I can actually take this screw ring back off and it won't hurt the seal at all because they've been sectioned into place, and that rubber ring around the bottom will be kind of formed over the edge of the glass jar. So there you go. That's my icicle pickle recipe. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you've learned a few things, I'd love it if you'd subscribe to my channel.